everybody, and welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about a very interesting category of game that really goes back to something I talked about quite a while ago, where I discussed my top 5 board gaming dislikes. One of those dislikes that I had was about character selection. What I talked about was I didn't like games that did character selection, but then the characters themselves were all the same. It doesn't make any sense, and it's like, what's the point of being a character if there's nothing unique about your character? So what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about games that do it correctly. What does that mean? It means that I'm going to be talking about games that you have character selection or some kind of role selection that you keep for the entire game, or at least typically will keep for the entire game. And in doing so, you have something unique about yourself that only you can do. You have a unique way of destroying or killing monsters or fighting or learning new things, whatever it happens to be. You have something unique about you as a character that helps the group or hurts the group, whatever it happens to be. But either way, that's actually one thing you'll notice is a good portion of these are actually cooperative games. But either way, we're going to go ahead and get started with one honorable mention. My honorable mention for this list is actually something that might sound a little bit unusual because it's actually my favorite game of all time, Cosmic Encounter. Now, why is it, first off, that this is on this list? Well, for those of you who have played Cosmic Encounter, you know that one of the first things you do is figure out which alien you're going to be. That will be your quote-unquote character for the rest of the game. The alien powers break the rules in some form or fashion, and each one is unique and does its own thing in a very special way. The thing is that not only can you potentially lose your power, but it can also be swapped out by somebody else. Somebody can steal your power and switch it out with their own. All sorts of crazy stuff. It's really ridiculous. But for the purpose of this list, what I was thinking more of is that you're a character in a game rather than like an entity, if that makes any sense. So in this case, it's more like you are like the galactic empire of the parasite and things like that. That's not really the feeling that I wanted when I was thinking about this list. I was thinking like, I am Joe and I do this. You know, like an actual, a real character rather than, like I said, an entity. You could say the same thing for something like not Twilight Struggle, but Twilight Imperium, or what's it called? Now I can't remember. Eclipse, that's the other one that I was thinking of. But either way, any game like that where you're sort of like a race rather than just a character, it's still good and it's still the exact type of thing that I'm talking about. But at the same time, you don't feel like you are that entity. It feels like you are just a person playing through something, if that makes any sense. I know it's a little bit really existential, but either way, it's still an honorable mention, but it is still my favorite game of all time, and you do have a unique character that you get to play, at least for most of the game, depending on who it is. That's another reason too, is that you might not be your character for the entire time. But either way, Cosmic Encounter is my honorable mention. At number 5, I've got a really, really fun game that is about one of everybody's favorite things to do, which is killing off some zombies. That's right, we've got Zombicide at number 5. So with Zombicide, it's really, really neat because not only do you have a specific character, you have character selection, but you have things like different starting equipment, you're gaining experience with your character, all sorts of crazy stuff. It's really great. And not only that, but you even have your own little miniature that indicates who you are. So it really feels a lot more like you are that character. You are playing as a character, you have some kind of unique thing that only you are able to do. And again, like many on this list, this is a co-op game, or at least it's typically designed as such. And that's something that character selection really, really shines in, is cooperative games, because then you have everybody who's capable of doing something. For example, something like relatively recently that came out, XCOM. which is it's an interesting board game. I am personally not a huge fan of it, but that is one great example of how in that case the video game and the aspects of that, where in the video game you were controlling absolutely everything, in the board game it sort of split amongst everybody else. It's really cool. It's a lot of fun. And in this case it's the same kind of thing where you have different expertise. You've got people that are capable of doing more actions, moving faster, all sorts of random stuff like that. But that's one of the issues, one of the minor gripes I have, is just that with the characters in this game and other similar, especially zombie games, one of the issues I have is that sometimes it's arbitrary things. You know, it's like you get an additional action. You can run faster, stuff like that. And there doesn't seem to be any particular rhyme or reason as to why that character does that. I mean, they can vaguely explain why it happens, but for me personally, it doesn't make a great deal of sense. So that's why it's lower on the list, but still, it's a good example of how to do character selection and what you want to see and what you want to do and all that great stuff. So either way, Zombicide is my number 5. At number 4, I have a game that unfortunately I haven't talked about too much, but is a really, really fun game and a great example of character selection in more than one way. The game is The New Science. Now, one of the reasons I absolutely adore this game is because you're actually playing as real people. You're playing as actual scientists. So amongst others, you've got Newton, you've got Leibniz, you've got who else? I believe Galileo is in there. Cooper, of the Cooper Belt, all sorts of characters. Really cool. But one of the cool things about it is, in addition to picking that character, you also have like a little blurb about the kind of stuff that they did, what they contributed to the scientific world. And like, you know, in the case of Isaac Newton, he worked a lot on alchemy, which was a little bit odd after he did a lot of physics stuff. But either way, you just get to learn something new about these people that you probably haven't heard of, or might not have heard of at least. It's a really good game, and the reason I like it for the character selection is that they have different influence values, because the way that the game works is you're literally doing science. You perform experiments to test hypotheses, and then if your experiments work, then you try to get the papers published so that everybody can say, oh wow, you are so amazing, you published this work. And that's the entire point. You earn like sort of prestige type of thing. But the idea is that each of the individual scientists has more or has an easier time doing certain things. So for example, they might be better at experimentation, they might be better at publications. And it's really based a lot off of the influence that the scientists had in life. Which is really cool. For example, Isaac Newton was essentially a celebrity, so he has a lot of influence when it comes to like talking to the church and things like that. Which is part of the game as well. It's really cool, and one of the reasons why it's lower on the list is simply because the differences are relatively minute. I mean, the entire thing is based off of the six-sided die, a D6, and you're talking about like a +1/+1 or like a single +2 and things like that. So it can make an enormous difference, but compared to some of the other games that not only I have talked about, but that I will talk about, the character selection is it's less relevant to what's going to happen. It's not arbitrary, well, quote arbitrary, like I was talking about with Zombicide. It still makes a difference, and it's nice because it's based in something that actually happened, and that makes sense for the purpose of the game itself. But overall, I do really enjoy this game. I love this game. I love scientific games regardless. But it's a little bit lower on the list simply because the character selection matters less than it matters in other games, but it still does matter, and on top of that, you get to learn a little bit as well. So overall, The New Science is my number 4. number 3, I have an amazing co-op game that I have talked about pretty much at every single chance that I've ever had to, where it is Arkham Horror. Oh, Arkham Horror. This is an incredible game in so many different ways. But in this case, the particular shining point is the characters. So incredible. Not only are we talking about characters that are directly out of Lovecraftian and not mythology, but mythos. But on top of that, you're also talking about characters that have abilities that make sense for them. So the way that this works is that you have stats. And one of the great things about this game is that you can actually alter your stats. You have little sliders that let you change what your stats are at basically the beginning of a round. And it's really interesting because you've got ranges typically from 1 to 5 depending. But the thing is, some characters might only be able to go as high as like a 3. For example, the basic debate in this game, quote unquote debate, is do you go with like strength, like brute force, or do you go with like mental willpower, spell casting type of things? So you can go with swords and knives, daggers and guns and all that kind of stuff. Or you can go the route with spells, enchantments, and things of that nature. So there are characters like academics. You know, you've got scientists, you've got librarians, you've got all sorts of stuff like that who generally lean more towards being able to use spells and things like that. And then you have like the mafia guy, the actual mobsters. You've got, you know, bounty hunters, all sorts of people like that who you would more associate with, you know, you're using guns and knives and swords and that kind of stuff. So it makes beautiful, wonderful sense. And on top of that, you as a player have the capability of altering, in a minor sense, altering what your character is capable of. And this can be for the context of you got some new gear that you want to equip, or you're just not getting what you thought that you would get that would fit better for your character, whatever it happens to be. There are a ton of different characters. The expansions add even more. It's ridiculous. But on top of that, every single character has a very special ability that's related to what they did in the mythos, which is really, really cool as well. So overall, just great source material, great, wonderful execution, and a great system for not only maintaining your character with the sliders, but also making it have enough wiggle room that you can do things that otherwise you probably wouldn't be able to do. Like if you had solely an intellectual character, then you wouldn't be able to fight whatsoever. But maybe you can get enough capability to fight that you'd be able to get out of a jam or something like that. But either way, a wonderful game overall. Arkham Horror, my number 3 game to actually pick real characters that matter. At number 2, I've got a game that unfortunately I really haven't talked about very much. I've talked about it several times in the comments for other videos, but for one of my videos, I don't think it's actually ever been in one. But either way, the game itself is Talisman. This is a great game. I love this game. One of my biggest things that I love about gaming, or for gaming, is fantasy settings. One of the first ways I got into gaming overall was with Dungeons and Dragons. So a game like this really speaks to me in terms of the setting, how things are working. You know, we've got wizards and dragons, and we've got, you know, the barbarian, the warrior, all those kinds of things. It's incredible. It's awesome. I love it. And on top of that, the greatest thing is obviously the character selection. Similarly to Arkham Horror, the way that it works is that you've got your health and you've got your will. I don't remember exactly what they're called in here. Let me see if it says on the back. It doesn't immediately look like. Oh, there. Strength and craft. Those are the things. So essentially, if you are a wizard, you will have low strength but high craft. things like that. It's just like Arkham Horror, it's related to like physical attacks and like magical attack type of thing. But the idea is that you gain experience points. You actually do this in Zombicide as well. You gain experience that lets you do more and more things. So when you gain experience in Talisman, then you can actually increase your strength or your craft. So obviously if you're a wizard, you would probably want to keep up with craft, but at the same time, you never know when you're going to have to pull out a dagger. So putting a couple points into the strength is really, really good. So again, this really speaks to my origins as a gamer, at least in terms of tabletop gaming, like real tabletop gaming, simply because I started off with D&D. And that's really what sort of drew me into this, because it's like, oh wow, I'm gaining experience, I can get more stuff, I can become more powerful, I get more items, I can do more damage, and I can get more shiny stuff. It's awesome. I love it. It's great. And the other thing is that this does have a great deal of expansions, and they add a ton of unique characters. So you've got things like you have your standard like wizard and warrior and thief and all those kinds of things. But then you also have just a bunch of other random stuff that you wouldn't really think that you might have. I won't give away too much, and also I can't remember most of them. But either way, Talisman, a great game overall. The one unfortunate thing, since I talked earlier about my board game dislikes, is this does use roll to move, which I'm just kind of like, I don't really like that fact. But as far as games go overall, there's very, very little that I can be upset about with this. It's a great game. It's a lot of fun to play. More importantly for this video, though, it has an extremely amazing character selection that actually matters. Talisman, my number 2. As you may or may not have been able to guess from my number 2, the number 1 is something that really even more so speaks to my origins as a board gamer or a tabletop gamer. And the game that I personally have is Dungeons & Dragons: The Legend of Drizzt, however you pronounce it. But either way, this is one of several tile exploration games based on Dungeons and Dragons. There's also the Castle Ravenloft, and then the Wrath of Asego. I don't remember how to pronounce it. It's a big giant dragon, really scary, very scary stuff. But either way, I personally have the Legend of Drizzt, and like I said, I talked more about Dungeons and Dragons than Talisman when I talked about Talisman, but for my purposes, Dungeons and Dragons, it is almost my calling. I love it. I love the fantasy setting. I love the very classical mage, wizard, warrior type of archetype characters, and that's exactly what we have here. And on top of that, the way that the game functions, the way that the mechanics actually worked, is based off of the D&D 4th edition rules. So you have things like you have at-will powers, you have the daily powers, the really big powers, and just like with Talisman, you gain experience. One thing that really puts this over the top for me, in addition to being obviously Dungeons and Dragons and using the Dungeons and Dragons rules, is that this is also cooperative. With Talisman, yes, you have like some cooperation, you can work together to an extent, but not much. And that's not a bad thing, but again, for the purposes that I see for character selection, for character creation, if you will, again, just goes back to I am used to things like D&D. I am used to making a character, being able to play as that character, all of that kind of stuff. It makes for a lot of fun, and for me personally, when I play a game like this, then I can actually get into character just like I do with a regular tabletop role-playing game. It's a lot of fun, and Again, the whole point of this video is just character selection done right, and the character selection actually making a difference. You have characters that can heal. You have characters that do a great deal of damage. You've got you run the gambit, and one of the things is that when you're playing this as a group, when you're playing this together, one thing that you want to make sure of is that you have a balance. You have to have a balanced group that's able to deal with a lot of different stuff. So I think that this game does a great job of making the character selection matter overall, just in general. But for me, for my purposes, my number one, the Dungeons and Dragons tile exploration game of The Legend of Drizzt. So that's it for me, everybody. I hope that you enjoyed my video that basically acts as the follow-up to my board game dislikes. In this case, discussing the games that I believe did actually do character selection correctly. That is, you have a character that you keep, and on top of that, the character selection actually makes a difference with what you're doing, both as a player and as a character in the game. So I really enjoy it. I hope that you guys enjoyed it as well. Please, as always, put any and all comments below, whether it's you want to talk about your favorite game of this type, if you think I'm completely wrong, completely right, whatever it wants to be. As always, please start a discussion. I love talking with you guys. You are absolutely amazing, and it's what keeps me doing this as often as I possibly can. But regardless, I hope that you enjoyed this particular video, and with that, I will see you next time.
Thank you again for watching my video of my top 5 games that have roles that matter. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I greatly look forward to seeing what games that you do and do not enjoy that are in this category. Whether there's a game that you really enjoy picking a role for, or one that you really don't like picking a role for and then having to be stuck with it, put it in the comments below. And as always, I've got several of my videos linked up at the top of the page so that you can take a look at some of my latest stuff. And as always, go ahead and click that big giant subscribe button so you can see more from me later on. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.